York City was a trip, guys. I feel like that was almost another lifetime ago. I don't even know how to start talking about it. I'm literally scrolling through my Instagram right now just because I'm like, where do I even start? But a lot of you guys are curious about my New York City experience. A lot of you guys are followers from my New York City experience, especially if you've come from TikTok. And I want to share a little bit about why I went to New York City, what I did in New York City, why I left New York City. And hopefully that addresses most of you guys' questions and curiosity about my New York City adventure. And Shark is currently snoring, and I really would like him to stop. Shark, 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 wake up. Thank you. So around the time that I was doing the podcast back in 2020, 2021, I just got this feeling in my soul that I should move to New York City. It wasn't necessarily a job opportunity that brought me there. I actually just knew I wanted to go, and I started exclusively looking for opportunities in New York. I graduated college in May of 2021 from the University of Texas at Austin, and think it was I think it was a combination of me like being influenced by other people that I was watching on the internet that had moved to New York City. Also just the idea that I am very intrinsically motivated and I wanted to be successful. And so I was like, let's move to New York City. That will be my ticket. I also knew that I was going to game the system. I've said this from day one, and I will say this forever because it literally worked. And if you're graduating college, I highly recommend that you do this. Move to a city that has a very high cost of living right out of college. Now, you will be poor. I was poor. And the only reason why I was semi not poor is because I ended up having some success on social media, but that was not guaranteed. I was pretty poor when I lived in New York City. I lived very much paycheck to paycheck, but I moved to a high cost of living city so I had a high salary out the gate. I had a much higher salary than anybody that I knew that was living in Texas after college. And I was able to use that now moving back to Austin to leverage a higher salary and now a slightly lower cost of living city, which Austin is very expensive now. But if I lived somewhere else, it would be even cheaper and I would have a lot more money. So that's just a little tip. I knew that I wanted to do that going into it. I didn't know my New York City stint would be as short as it was. It was really only like a year and a half of me actually living there, but I enjoyed it while I was there. People ask me all the time, do you regret moving to New York? Because I now live back where I grew up. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I went to college here, and I moved out of the city or moved out to the city and then moved out of the city after a year and a half back home. And long story short is I really don't have any regrets. I'm very thankful that I did it. And I think for me, it was extremely important that I moved out of Austin when I graduated college, just because I had grown up here my entire life. And I knew that if I didn't do it then, I didn't know if I was ever going to do it. And I was also dating somebody at the time, and it was crashing and burning at that point. The relationship was pretty much over, and I just knew that I needed to get out and get away and restart my life, rebuild my life. And I was kind of also going through a really big self-discovery period of like, who do I want to be? And I knew that just moving and a fresh start would do that for me. And so I decided to move to New York City. And I was very confident that it was like New York or nowhere. Like I had no plans to move anywhere else other than New York City. I only applied for jobs in New York City. And I think a lot of people around me were confused by how hell-bent I was on New York City. My parents didn't seem like they really understood. I feel like a lot of people didn't really understand. Like people were excited for me, but they were just like, why are you saying that you're moving to New York City? You literally have no job and it's hella expensive. And people were giving me all these reasons as to why I shouldn't do it. And I just didn't listen to them. And so pro tip, just never listen to people that don't want you to accomplish your dreams, because it was a dream of mine. And I was just like, I'm not going to listen to you. And so I didn't. And I just had peace inside myself of like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. I don't know the how or the why, but I'm going to do it. And so I graduated college and I moved to New York City pretty shortly after. I think I started my job in June of 2021. I got a job and I worked remotely in Austin for a couple weeks or like a month before I moved out to New York City in July of 2021. And I very quickly like flew out there with my old roommate Sarah, who I lived with, and we looked for apartments. That was quite a time. I don't know if I've ever felt that much stress in my entire life as New York City apartment hunting. I don't wish that on my worst enemy. It's awful. But we did find an apartment and it was a pretty good apartment. I liked it. Even though it was a 6th floor walk up. We lived in Gramercy in Manhattan. It's kind of like it's lower Manhattan, but like not super low. It was near Union Square, or no, it was near Madison Square Park, also near Union Square. I worked in an office right by Union Square. So it was all very walkable. Like within 15 minutes, I could get anywhere that I needed to go. Backing up a little bit, I knew I wanted to move to New York. I only applied for jobs in New York, and I ended up getting a job in the city in June. And I actually signed the offer letter on the day I walked the stage and graduated college, which was what I think like May 21st, I would say. I wonder, I'm on my Instagram right now. I wonder what day it was. It looks like May 14th, 21st, 23rd. I don't know, somewhere around there. I graduated college. I got a bachelor's in design and a minor in business. And I signed the offer. I negotiated for the salary that I wanted. And I flew out to New York like pretty soon after to look for apartments. And then I moved in July. It was quite a whirlwind of a couple weeks after graduating college because I also went out to LA for a little while to visit one of my friends, which I talked about in one of my most recent episodes. Well, it wasn't recent, it was 3 years ago, but one of my last episodes that I recorded, you'll hear me talk about visiting LA. And then right after that, I flew to New York City, went in apartment hunting, found an apartment, and Sarah and I moved to New York. Now, when I moved to New York, I actually moved in, I would say, like a week before Sarah did. So I had the whole apartment to myself. And I spent the first couple days like unpacking. There was nothing in my apartment. The first night that I slept in my apartment, I was by myself in a city where I literally didn't know anybody. There was no reason for me to move to New York other than I just like felt like I had to and I wanted to. And I slept on an air mattress from Target. I literally bought an air mattress, picked it up from Target the day that my flight got into the city. And I had boxes shipped of like my important stuff, but I didn't have any furniture or anything. I was going to buy furniture and get it all set up there. And I slept on an air mattress with nothing in my apartment, all by myself. And I actually cried the first night that I was there. Part of it was excited, like part of it was being nervous. Part of it was being like, what have I done with my life? Part of it was, yeah, being scared. And part of it was praising God too, of like, I can't believe that I'm doing this. And I think like that moment really instilled a lot of confidence in me that I can do anything I set my mind to. Because having never left Austin my entire life, moving halfway across the country was such a huge deal. And for me, it was a really big milestone of like, wow, I'm really more capable than I think that I am. And so the first few days were actually kind of lonely because I literally didn't know anybody. So I went days without like speaking to anybody. And so I remember I was in the Macy's, the Herald Square Macy's, which is like the biggest Macy's in the US. And like that's where they do the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade or they end there or something. I was at the Nespresso counter buying Nespresso pods. And it was maybe my second or third day in New York City. And I literally remember striking up a conversation with the cashier guy who happened to also be from Texas. And I talked to him for like 20 minutes and I was just like so thankful to have somebody to speak to because I was like, I haven't spoken to anybody in days. The first few days were a little bit rough, just like building furniture and not having any friends or anybody to talk to, and also like not really knowing what to do because I had no idea where I was and I'm very unfamiliar with New York City. I had only been in New York City like one time before I moved there. So yeah, I was just like a little bit lost. But throw a person in the fire, you'll see what kind of gold comes out, you know what I mean? And so I ended up hitting up a friend of mine that I had met through church in Austin who knew about a church in New York City. And at that time, I was like really trying to get back into my faith and being involved in a church. And it had been really helpful for me in Austin, like making friends and feeling connected. So I was like, I'm just going to go to church. So I ended up going to this church called C3, and I texted a girl that my friend from Austin was like, text this girl when you get to New York. This is my friend in New York who goes to C3. So I just like on a whim was just like, it's my first Sunday in New York. Like, I guess I'll go to church. Maybe I'll meet people. And so I texted her. She invited me to service. She came and sat with me. Super sweet. Grace, if you are listening to this, I don't know if you're listening to this, but I'm just so thankful for you. And I actually ended up getting brunch with some random people that I met. They were just the kindest people. And they just invited me out to brunch with them. And I spent 3 hours at Friend of a Farmer, if you're familiar on Gramercy or near Gramercy Park on Irving Place, at brunch with all these new people. And they actually ended up being my friends that I had in New York City, or connecting me to other people that I ended up being close with as well. So, that was just quite a God thing, in my opinion. And I'm just so thankful that I didn't let fear of being alone, meeting new people, being awkward, like any of that kind of stuff, stop me from going to church that day or making friends and talking to new people. And I feel like ever since I moved to New York, I'm extremely comfortable around strangers now. And I think that that is one of the greatest character traits that I built out of that experience is I'm really comfortable around anybody and I can talk to anybody and I love talking to anybody, even though I would say that I'm a self-proclaimed introvert, but that's just because I like to live alone and I like my own space. But when I'm ready to go out and socialize, I do enjoy to socialize. But I moved to New York and was starting to make friends through the church. Sarah moved there. She had some connections in the city of like people that she knew. And I had a friend from UT that also was moving in. So I knew like some people, but I would say the first couple months were really just me exploring. And that's also when I started my TikTok. So I really just wanted to share my New York City experience with the people back home. I thought about starting a YouTube channel, but video content in longer form is like a lot more effort. And so I was like, let me just make some TikToks. So I would make TikToks of me like going around the city or showing my outfit or what I was doing. And that's when my TikTok started to take off. And I was taking a break from the podcast at the time. And I really did plan to get back to posting the podcast every week, but I just never did. And it was kind of just, it's kind of embarrassing to admit that I just kind of accidentally stopped. And now we're back. But I feel like that first like 6 months of being in New York was just a lot of me making friends, trying new things, went out to so many different restaurants, parties, really just figuring out who I was and where I fit in the city, getting involved in my church, and just trying to like, honestly, if I'm being real, like get my mind off everything that had just happened in my life in the last year in Austin. Because not only was it COVID, but I was also getting out of a very long relationship, that one that lasted the majority of my college experience. And I, of course, was like dealing with it. I was going to therapy and I was trying to process through it, but I was just like anything that could distract me from the pain that I felt inside or the loneliness that I felt or the anger that I had. It was kind of what I was doing. And I'm very thankful that I took that time in my life to intentionally not date anybody and really just heal and move on in my life, because I could have gone down a very different path of emotional destruction. And I decided that that's not the kind of person that I wanted to be. And so I didn't. And so I'm thankful. I feel like that was God's protection in my life of like really bringing me into a group of people that helped me heal and wanted to get to know me and love me and bring me into a positive community in New York, instead of what a lot of people think of in New York City, which is like partying or drinking heavily or I don't know, bad habits with money and all of that kind of stuff. It's very easy to live a lifestyle in New York City that is not healthy or honorable, if I'm putting it lightly. And I just decided that's not the girl that I am. And so I'm very thankful that I was surrounded by people that really lifted me up in that time and helped me become the person that I am today. And so, yeah, I spent those 6 months doing that. And then in early 2022, I decided to do the 75 hard. If you're not familiar with the 75 hard, you, for 75 days, do, I don't even know if I could list it all off now. You do 2 workouts a day. One has to be inside, one has to be outside, 45 minutes long, each. Shark. I really hope you can't hear Shark snoring in the audio, but I guess that adds to the character of the podcast because he's my co-host or something. You have to read 10 pages of a book a day. You have to drink, is it a gallon of water a day? And that sounds about right. You have to pick a diet and stick to it, and then you have to take a progress picture every day. And at this time, I really felt like I was kind of on a high. Like I kind of felt like I was the happiest and best version of myself that I had been in a long time. I was going to Equinox in the city. I was working out all the time. I had a solid friend group. I had, a good work environment. I was making friends at work. I had good work-life balance at the time. I loved my boss. I really felt like everything was going right for me. I was managing my finances. I wasn't like rich by any means. I was actually pretty poor, but I was really worried when I even negotiated my salary to get more money when I got my offer. I was like still afraid that wasn't going to be enough. And it it was enough. It was just enough. It wasn't more than enough, but it was just enough for me to live a comfortable life. Not as nice of a life as I was used to in Austin, but comfortable and able to afford groceries and also to go out to dinners and to buy new clothes every once in a while and just like live. And I really felt like at the beginning of 2022, I was kind of stepping into this new phase of my life of like, I'm really on top of the world. Like, I'm really confident that I can do anything. And I'm really proud of who I am and who I'm becoming. So I was doing the 75 hard because I wanted to challenge myself. And that's actually what made my TikTok the most successful, was people following along for that season of my life. And what happened in the subsequent months was actually some of the hardest months of my life. And what was happening is basically I was doing all this stuff for the 75 hard. It is very difficult, especially doing it in the winter in New York City. Doing outdoor walks or runs in 10-degree weather or in the snow was quite, I don't even know if I want to say a bad idea, but it kind of felt like a bad idea. Over the months of the 75 hard, it goes from like June 1st to I think like March 17th if you start, or not June, January. What am I saying? January 1st to March 17th, I think, are the first 75 days of the year. By the end of those 75 days, I probably felt the worst I had ever felt in my entire life. Like not only mental health wise, but physical health wise. And that kind of started a cascade of a few months in March, April, and May of 2022 that I don't even know how to describe it. The worst months of my life. Like mentally, I was not okay. Physically, I was not okay. I was in and out of the doctor. I went to the ER a few times. I was having such severe anxiety that I didn't want to leave my home. I did have a couple really scary things happen to me when I lived in New York City. One being I had a man try to follow me into my home, and I literally had to like slam the door on him. I like ran into my apartment, had to slam the door on him, and I'm pretty sure I like broke his hand or something. That was really scary. I had people follow me at night. I had homeless men like touching me on the subway. I was groped in a bar. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. Thankfully, nothing horrible happened to me, but I was scared for my safety. And I also was, at the time I didn't know, but I now know that I was dealing with the effects of mold poisoning. Now, why I think this happened, like 7 months into me living in New York City and not immediately when I was living in New York City, is like early on in New York, it was July, August, it was hot. And when I moved into this apartment, there was an AC unit that was already installed. They didn't have central air in this apartment. It was a very old building. It was a 6th floor walk up, which was not ideal, but my quads were insane, honestly, when I lived in New York. I kind of missed that. But there was a air unit that was in my apartment, which honestly was kind of a selling point for me because it's like a whole ordeal to install a portable AC unit. And my roommate Sarah had to do it, but I didn't have to do it. And so I was like, yes, I don't have to do this because it's already in there and somebody left it there. And I really only needed the air conditioning for like a month when I first moved to New York. And so I don't think like me being exposed to the mold was like that bad because I really only needed the air for like a month. So like later in the year and like through the winter, I never turned the AC on and you just use the radiator because it was really cold outside. But coinciding with me exercising really hard and being a little bit more stressed out at work and also the heat kicking back in like outside and needing the air conditioning, I found out much later, like almost a year later, that AC unit was infected with like toxic levels of black mold. And so in the March, April, May timeframe of 2022, like I said, was in and out of the doctor. I went to the doctor because I was like, my mind was just like not well. Like I was like, what's happening to me? Like I'm thinking thoughts that I shouldn't be thinking. Like I don't know why my brain is this way. Nothing's happening to me. Nothing is going wrong in my life to have this severe of anxiety or this severe fear of like leaving my home. Like I didn't even want to go to the office because I just like felt like I couldn't leave my home. I would sleep 12 hours one night and wake up feeling exhausted. One of the things that was the worst part was that my limbs would like fall asleep. Like, you know, when your foot falls asleep, like every once in a while, and it's not a big deal. My entire limbs would like fall asleep at any time of the day. Especially at night, I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would feel like my arm wasn't even attached to my body. And I literally had to like shake my arm like crazy and like try to get the blood flowing back into my arm. And I would go to bed like scared that like I don't know, my arm was going to fall off or something. I don't know how that works, but like my obviously was not getting good circulation in my body. So my like limbs would tingle and I gained a lot of weight. That was like another thing that was like really difficult for me is in about a month I gained 10 pounds. I would say like in March of 2022. And obviously being a girl that's like trying to do social media and also just being a 22-year-old girl at the time, like body image is such a huge deal. And it contributed to like the decline in my mental health too, just because I like literally would look at myself in the mirror and like not recognize myself. I ended up gaining probably about 25 pounds in total in like a 3-month time span. And I was livid and I would go to the doctor and I would be like, this is not normal. I am not okay. And they would run all these labs and they would be like, you're fine. Maybe you should try to do things and be less stressed and eat less food. And I was like, I haven't changed my diet. I don't have anything particularly stressful. I mean, I was doing the 75 hard, but then I stopped and I took a break from exercising and I was doing everything that I could to like make sure I was getting good quality sleep, not pushing myself too much in terms of my schedule. I was really feeling like I was doing everything I possibly could and I kept getting worse and my mind was just not a good place for me to be in. I feel like if you've ever struggled with mental health, you know that feeling of your mind not being the home that you want to live in. And I just remember having multiple times of like being at home on my floor of my bedroom, like I'm gonna cry. Oh, you guys, you get the real tea. I remember being kneeled on the floor of my bedroom, like my arms on my bed, like praying to God of like, would you just give me a sound mind? Like, why do I feel in my body and my mind like such anxiety? Why is this happening to me? Like, I knew something was wrong. Like, I knew something was happening to me, but I had no idea what was happening to me because I would go to all of these doctors and they just had no explanation, and they told me that I was fine because my blood work would come out, like, okay, other than, like, showing some signs of, like, insulin resistance, and my liver function was declining a little bit, but I was primarily concerned about, like, my heart because I was born with a heart defect, and it's generally, like, controlled, like, it's not a huge issue, but it's something that I do have to get monitored, and I was just really worried about my heart, and so I would go to the cardiologist, and they said that my heart's okay, but I would, like, wake up in a sweat with, like, my heart, like, beating out of my chest, palpitations, chest pain, all this stuff, like, every day. Like, honestly, this time period of my life physically was hell for me, and it was just really hard to share this with people because people didn't tell me that, like, I looked like something was wrong with me, but, like, inside I felt like something was wrong with me, and I didn't know how to share that with people. And so, yeah, I tried to just, like, enjoy my life in New York as much as I could, but it got to a point where I actually ended up flying back to Austin for the first time since I moved back to New York City, or to New York City, for my friend Bree's birthday. And I just had an overwhelming sense of peace of, like, you just need to go home. Like, something's happening to you and you're not okay and you need to go home. And at that point, I was just kind of over the city. I was over the hustle. I was over the lifestyle there. And I really didn't know where else to go or what else to do. And I actually remember too having a call with my boss of once I decided that, like, I needed to get out of the city, that I cried on Zoom to my boss, and I was like, "I have to leave New York," because they hired me to work hybrid in this office in Flatiron, and I was just like, I can't live in New York City anymore, like, something's happening to me, and I don't know what it is, and I have to leave." And in that moment, like, my biggest fear was, like, losing this job because I actually really enjoyed the job, and I was really proud of the work that I was doing, and I really felt like my career was starting to take off, especially with TikTok too, and my design stuff, and I was just really confident in my career at that moment, and I was like, "Damn, I'm gonna have to forfeit all of this because my health is not okay and my mind is not okay." It was one of the hardest phone calls that I had to give because I knew that I might have to lose my job, and by the grace of God, and I'm just so thankful, and Alex, I'm sure you're listening to this because I actually work for her again now. Funny story, she years later called me up and said, "Hey, come work for me again," at a different company that I now work for remotely in Austin, and that was also such a blessing. Alex is just such a blessing in my life, but I remember that phone call of, like, really being ready to lose a job that I loved, and I was just so angry that this was what I had to do, but I really didn't have any other choice. So I called her and I was like, "Hey, like, I just need to be for real with you right now. Like, I am not well and I need to go home. And I can't live here. I can't, I'm not coming back. Like, I'm going. And if that means that I'm losing my job, then I'm losing my job. I've decided that that's what I have to do." And by the grace of God, she literally let me keep my job. I'm not really sure how that all worked behind the scenes because obviously there are people higher up than her in the company that she probably had to talk to. I don't know how big of a deal it was, but to me, it was a big deal. And I was able to move back to Austin a couple months later and keep my job and work remotely out in Austin. And so I say that I lived in New York for actually a year and a half because I moved to Austin for like 2 months. And for some reason, I decided to move back. Well, it wasn't for some reason, but I did move back to New York City for a few months in the winter of 2022 into 2023, the beginning of 2023. And I at this point was just like really focused on resting and like trying to figure out what was wrong with me health wise. I actually didn't end up finding out about my mold poisoning until I saw a holistic doctor in February of 2023. So it was about 7 or 8 months of me really not knowing what was going on with me and just still dealing with the effects of the mold poisoning, and also finding out that the apartment had toxic levels of mold because we got the apartment tested, because Sarah basically stayed another year and found a new roommate to replace me in our Gramercy apartment, and I left and she was able to get the apartment tested. A lot of people have asked about the lawsuit situation, and we tried for a little while to sue the landlord because Sarah had to have surgery at one point and she thinks it's related to her mold poisoning. She was also diagnosed with mold poisoning. She's had a lot of health issues as well from this whole situation. And we did try to find a lawyer that would take our case. And I think at this point, if I'm not mistaken, we're coming up on the statute of limitations. So I don't think we can sue anymore. But for a while, I was really interested in suing just because of how much I felt like I had to give up in order to heal from this situation and how truly catastrophic it was in my life. Like, I loved my friends in New York City. There were aspects about living in New York that I did not like some of the fast-pacedness of life and how transient the city is and lack of access to nature. But there were ways around some of those things, that I could have moved to a different area, or I could have just like decided to slow down myself. But it was really just the fact that my health was in such bad shape that I had to leave the city. Yeah, at this point, I've decided we're not suing anymore just because no lawyer decided that they wanted to take our case. We've reached out to many lawyers. Nobody wanted to take the case. Yeah, I think at this point we've let it go, but that would have been sweet if I could have gotten a lawyer to help us win a bunch of money for that and reimburse us for all our medical bills, because I was spending thousands of dollars going to the ER and the doctor just to try to figure out what was wrong with me, which they were not any help at all, but that's fine. They didn't know what was going on either. Yeah, so I moved back to Austin in, I think it was July of 2022. So I was in New York for a solid year from July of 2021 to 22. And then I was in Austin for a couple months. I bought my car, so my Tesla. Love her. She's the best. I was really just focused on getting back involved in my church and just relaxing. So that's what I did for a few months, but I was still struggling with some of the effects of the mold poisoning. And then I I lived in like a sublease that really was, I'm very grateful that it happened all this way, because I was able to move into a sublease for a couple months with some girls that were friends of a friend. And that was great. But I wanted to live alone and I wanted to live in an apartment near downtown. And so it gave me a couple months to search for an apartment. And then I found this apartment. It was beautiful. I was so excited to move in. I signed a lease. It was a brand new building. Nobody had ever lived in it. And it wasn't done being built, but like it was about to be done. So I signed the lease and I was like going to move in like November or something. And they start messaging me like, the apartment actually isn't ready. Like, you're going to have to push back the move in date. So I was like, I had to fly out to New York City for some work, because I was at the time flying in and out of the city for work, because I would lead photo shoots and there would be like important meetings and stuff. And so they'd fly me in and out from Austin during that time period. And I knew I was going to be out there anyway for a week for a photo shoot. And so I just decided, like, oh, maybe I should just stay in New York while I wait for this apartment to be ready. So I actually subleased from a friend of mine for a few months and move back out to Austin. Like, I put everything that I had in a storage unit in Austin and I moved back out to New York, and I'm just like waiting for this apartment to be ready. And so moving back to New York was quite a time too, because it almost felt like nothing had changed and yet everything had changed, because I wasn't planning to like permanently move back. It was kind of like an interim few months of me being there. And it was, like, really tough because at times I was like, "Dang, like, maybe I do wanna move back," and other times I was like, "I can't wait to move back to Austin." So it was a very confusing time for me, and my health was still not great, and I even look at pictures of myself from back then, and you can see, like, in my face, like, that I don't look it's like there wasn't life in it like I feel like I have now, and by the time I came back from those few months in New York, the apartment situation had fallen through and I needed to find a new place to live because this construction timeline just kept getting pushed back and back and back. And that's when I moved to Costa Rica. Now that's like a whole other podcast. And maybe if you guys want to hear about that, let me know. I mean, I feel like I should talk about my Costa Rica experience, but if we're exclusively talking about New York, my final time in New York was at the end of January of 2023, and I have not moved back to New York since. I've been back just because I would fly back and forth for work a lot, and I'm still doing that now with my current job. But I would say I officially moved out of New York City with no plan to return in January of 2023. So that was my New York City experience. If you guys have questions, feel free to drop them on the Instagram. I feel like I'll cut up some clips from this and like put them as reels on the Instagram or my TikTok so you guys can ask questions on there. And I'll probably do a Q&A episode at some point. So I'll just gather some questions. Yeah, people are often confused by that timeline because I moved out of New York and then I was in Austin trying to like recover from my mold poisoning, but I never really got better. I was trying to move into an apartment in Austin, but then the apartment wasn't ready. And then I had a bunch of work stuff in New York. So I was like, let me just move back to New York for a few months. And then I did that. And then I moved back to Austin and my apartment wasn't ready. So then I canceled that lease and then just spontaneously moved to Costa Rica for 2 months. And then I moved back to Austin and then found the apartment that I live in now that I moved in at the end of March of 2023. So that's my life story. It was a hectic 2022 and 2023. That whole year of my life was truly so chaotic and it took a lot out of me. I feel like by the time I moved into this place, I was just like overwhelmed of what just happened to me. Like what did I just do? Like I was on a plane like every week or moving every couple months. I was just all over the place. So I was grateful to really find a apartment that I love, and I re-signed this lease for another year, and I love the people here, and I just love my life here. And I don't think I would have found this place if I didn't go through all of that. So I'm grateful. But yeah, I know this episode is getting a little bit long, but that was my New York City experience. There's so much more to share. There was so much that happened. I didn't even get to get into like parties that I went to or places that I went. On my second day of living in New York City, though, I did see Ryan Reynolds in Madison Square Park filming something. So that was cool. But yeah, there's a lot of celebrity sightings, a lot of cool parties, a lot of fun stuff I got invited to because of being an influencer and like doing TikTok, and like getting invited to New York Fashion Week was so cool. And I get invited every single fashion week since then, but I haven't really gone back since I've lived in New York just because I don't know. I just haven't felt the need, but maybe I will. I'm kind of interested in going back for maybe the fall fashion week. There's so many more stories. I'm like, dang, maybe we need a part two. I'll field some questions and think of some stories. I kind of just one take wondered this one as well, just thinking about chronologically what all was happening. But overall, I think my New York experience taught me to not be afraid to follow your dreams, but it's okay if your dreams don't work out, and you will always be redirected in the direction that you're supposed to go. And even though bad things happen or things happen to you that are unexplainable, God is still with you and He is still for you. And that's something I have to remind myself even now, like in situations I'm going through right now, is recognizing that there is a purpose in your pain if you allow it. And so yeah, I look back on my New York City experience with fondness of like, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so grateful that I went for it, because if I didn't go for it, I think I'd be kicking myself now of like, why did I never do that? And I think it developed that character trait in me as well of like just going for things. And so I'm glad that I went for it. And I hope you just didn't hear sharks snoring for 3 hours. I'm reducing the background noise and enhancing the audio. So I hope it's literally okay. But shark is asleep. It served the purpose that it needed to serve. And I'm grateful that I did it. And it's really impacted my life ever since because it's now the reason why I have the job that I have now. It's the reason why I do social media the way that I do it. I don't know. I guess that's all I got. That was a long one. I'm thirsty. I feel like when I record podcasts, I just kind of like dissociate and I just like talk and then I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like 45 minutes later. Hope that cleared up some stuff. Hopefully that was an interesting story and there's just so much more to be said on all of that. But if you would like to follow the podcast on Instagram, it's at What's Stopping You Podcast. And if you want to give the podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, go write a review. I'll love you forever. And all the links to all of that will be in the description of the episode. I feel like I'm kind of like ending on a depressing note. I don't know. Do you guys feel that way? I just kind of feel like it was like, oh, that sucked, you know? I don't know. It was a necessary suck though. You know what I mean? Anyway, hope you guys are having a good day. And if you want to move somewhere and do something, you should do it because I would not be where I am today without that, without the valleys or the mountains. So I'm thankful. Didn't always feel very thankful during it. Honestly, why did I have to get mold poisoning? That was just really extra. But I also think if I didn't get mold poisoning, I would have never moved out of the city. And if I had never moved out of the city, I would have never gone to Costa Rica. And if I never went to Costa Rica, I would have never changed my lifestyle to the more balanced lifestyle that I live now. And I also wouldn't have had the stories and perspective to share with people that I do now. And I would have never moved back to Austin into this apartment with these people, with getting my dog, like all of this stuff. Like it all connects and it's all on purpose. I am thankful now in hindsight that I can see why everything had to happen the way that it happened. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't have a short and sweet way to wrap this up, but hope you guys like that one. I have no idea what I just said. And we out.